Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
7 days. That was all it took. Humanity lost the war, not in battle, at a table. The pen did not shake. It should have. The hand holding it belonged to Secretary General Tommaso Venk, a man who had spent 3 decades arguing for human sovereignty in every chamber that would hear him. A man who once walked out of a coalition summit because an ambassador mispronounced his nation's name. A man with pride so deep it was structural. Now he signed away the species. His eyes were open. That was the worst part. Not closed, not glazed, not obviously wrong. Open, clear. Focused on the document in front of him with the calm attention of someone reviewing a dinner menu. His hand moved in smooth, practiced strokes. His posture was perfect, but the muscles around his jaw were slack. The micro-expressions that make a face human, the flicker of doubt, the tightening around the eyes when something costs, were gone. Tommaso Venk was present in body. Everything else had been emptied out and replaced with compliance. The Eldari did not call it control. They called it alignment. 300 diplomatic representatives watched. They had all come to witness the end of humanity's war. The ceremony was held aboard the Valith Ascending, the Eldari diplomatic flagship, a vessel so large it generated its own tidal effects on nearby moons. Its interior was open, curved, white and pale gold, every surface shaped to carry thought. The walls amplified psychic projection. Standing inside was like standing inside a skull that was thinking at you. They had all come to witness the end of the shortest war in modern galactic history. The Eldari Concord had broken humanity's military in 7 days. Not through superior firepower, though they had that. Not through numbers, though those were overwhelming. Through the mind. Eldari warships did not open with plasma volleys or kinetic bombardment. They opened with projection, waves of psychic force that passed through bulkheads and helmets and bone. At first it was small. Delays. Hesitation. Orders repeated. Then it spread. Crews lost track. Commands unraveled. Ships drifted out of formation and fired at the wrong targets. Or each other. By the 4th engagement, there was nothing left to coordinate. 7 days, total collapse. Venk finished. He set the pen down and stepped back. Behind him, 6 other human leaders waited their turn. Admiral Goss, Minister Lendell, Director Brannick, Governor Orlan, Fleet Marshal Rudd, Secretary Aram, each one a name that had once meant resistance, each one walking to the table with the same frictionless calm, signing without hesitation, stepping back without expression. The documents were physical. The Eldari insisted on it. They believed in ceremony, in the tangible weight of defeat. Each clause was printed on a substrate that bonded with the signer's biometrics on contact. Irrevocable. Binding at the molecular level. The Eldari had learned from previous conquests that digital agreements could be denied. Paper could be burned. This could not be undone. Clause 1. Total disarmament of all human military assets. Clause 2. Territorial concession of all off-world colonies. Clause 3. Dissolution of United Earth Command as a sovereign authority. Clause 4. Indefinite psychic monitoring of human leadership. Clause 5. Reclassification of humanity as a protectorate species under Eldari stewardship. 7 signatures. 7 empty faces. 7 pens set down without the slightest tremor. The gallery projected. The Eldari do not make sound to celebrate. Instead, the Vithani cast, the ruling psionics who lined the upper gallery like statues carved from gray marble, projected. Images flooded the hall. Every mind present received them simultaneously. Earth's fleets, drifting dead. Human soldiers dropping weapons they no longer remembered holding. Cities going quiet as planetary defense grids shut down one by one. Command centers emptying. Screens going dark. Flags lowered on 100 installations across 3 systems. And finally, the image of a species kneeling. Not literal. Abstract. A psychic impression of submission so complete it felt like temperature. A coolness that settled in the chest and stayed there. The alien delegates absorbed it. The Torvesi clicked their arms in approval. The Krithan sat motionless, their translator membranes still. The Devasik watched with the hollow recognition of a species that remembered being on that stage. The Owen recorded. Humanity was corrected. At the far edge of the observation hall, behind the rows of seated diplomats, in the section reserved for monitored civilians, General Marin Dukovic stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He was 63, built like a load-bearing wall. His dress uniform had been taken from him 2 days after the surrender, replaced with gray civilian clothes that fit poorly on purpose. An Eldari compliance officer stood 4 meters to his left, close enough to project a suppression field if Dukovic showed signs of aggression. 2 more officers flanked the civilian section at measured intervals, their silver eyes scanning the small group of humans permitted to attend. Witnesses. That was the official term. The Eldari wanted humans to see, wanted them to carry the memory back and spread it. Defeat as education. Dukovic did not look at the compliance officers. He did not look at Venk. He looked at the document on the table, at the biometric signatures drying on alien substrate. His face was stone. Not the emptied calm of the controlled delegates. Something harder, older. The stillness of a man who had already made every decision he would ever need to make, and was now simply watching the consequences line up. He had designed Cobalt 17 years before the Eldari made first contact. Not for the Eldari. Not for any specific enemy. For the certainty, the mathematical, historical, strategic certainty, that one day something would come that humanity could not beat in a straight fight. Something that would force capitulation. Something that would put a pen in a puppet's hand and call it peace. Dukovic had briefed 3 people on the full architecture. 2 were dead. The 3rd had walked into a buried relay station on Callisto 9 months ago and had not left. He watched the 7 signatures dry. He felt nothing. Because feeling was not the point. The point had been made 17 years ago, in a room with no windows, when a younger version of himself had written a single sentence on a whiteboard and underlined it twice. If we are ever made to kneel, the floor opens. Archon Seluvan. Ray descended the gallery steps with the unhurried grace of something that had never once considered the possibility of being wrong. He was tall. All Vithani were tall. His skin was the color of deep water, smooth and tight over a skeletal structure that curved where human bones went straight. His eyes were solid. No iris, no pupil, just fields of pale silver that reflected light like polished stone. He wore layered ceremonial wraps in white and gray, each layer denoting a rank in the caste structure that most alien species could not fully comprehend, and humanity had never been invited to learn. He stopped at the center of the hall. The human delegates stood in a row behind the signing table, motionless, awaiting dismissal. Seluvan did not look at them. He projected. Every mind in the hall received the image, a galaxy in motion. Thousands of civilizations turning in the long spiral, and among them, a small, bright point, Earth, dimming, cooling, settling into the structure like a stone sinking into still water, peaceful, ordered, resolved. The message was elegant and total. The disruption is over. The gala began immediately. The Eldari believed in continuity between victory and celebration. To them, There was no gap between the act of conquest and the act of culture. The signing table was cleared by attendants who moved in practiced silence. The observation hall's walls shifted, panels rotating to reveal alcoves filled with bioluminescent displays, living art that pulsed in time with projected emotional fields. Food and atmosphere compounds were dispensed for the various species present. The lighting softened. Saluvan moved through the gala with the confidence of a host who had built the room, written the guest list, and authored the event being celebrated. He paused beside each delegation, projected greetings, received projections in return. To the Krithan, he projected stability, an image of trade routes secured, borders settled. They responded with cautious acceptance. To the Torvesi, he projected opportunity, new markets, new resources, a pacified sector open for commerce. They responded with enthusiasm, poorly disguised as diplomacy. To the Devasik, he projected kinship, one corrected species recognizing the correction of another. The Devasik projected nothing in return. They never did. 4 centuries under Eldari stewardship had taught them that projecting was a privilege they no longer possessed. And then, the Eldari began their showcase. They projected the war, all 7 days of it, compressed into a psychic exhibition that played across every mind in the hall like a waking dream. Saluvan held the final image, humanity's leaders seated at a table, signing, and let it linger. The gala audience absorbed it the way one absorbs the final movement of a symphony, complete, beautiful in its totality. He passed the human section and slowed, not to acknowledge them, to let them see him not acknowledging them. Dukovich stood in the same position, hands clasped, face empty. 4 meters away, his compliance officer projected a low-grade suppression field, standard protocol for high-risk monitored civilians. It pressed against Dukovich's thoughts, like a hand resting on his shoulder. A reminder, do not think too loudly. Dukovich did not think loudly. He thought in a frequency the Eldari had never learned to hear. The frequency of a man who had finished thinking years ago. 11 light minutes away, buried under 600 meters of ice on Callisto's northern hemisphere, Commander Ivo Halta sat in a chair that had not been manufactured by any military contractor on record. The room was small, 3 meters by 4. Concrete walls lined with signal-absorbing mesh, no windows. 1 door, blast-rated, sealed from the inside. A console built into the far wall, dark for the last 9 months. A cot, a water recycler. Nutrient packs stacked in a crate beneath the cot. The air was cold and tasted like recycled metal. Halta was 41, lean, calm in the way that comes from rehearsing a single moment until it becomes muscle memory. He had been sitting in this room for 9 months, waiting, not hoping, not dreading, waiting the way a circuit waits for current. The console woke up. A single line of text appeared on the black screen. Green characters, monospaced. Treaty ratification detected. Public broadcast confirmation. Cross-referencing disarmament clause. Cross-referencing territorial concession. Cross-referencing coercion markers. Halta read it. The system was not receiving a signal. It was reading public channels, news feeds, diplomatic broadcasts. The Eldari had transmitted the signing across every network in the sector, a display of dominance. Cobalt saw it. The text scrolled. Coercion markers. Biometric irregularity in signatories. Neural suppression patterns, consistent with external psychic influence. 7 of 7 signatories display identical motor signatures. Probability of voluntary compliance, 0. The system read the biometrics directly from the broadcast. 7 humans signing with identical hand pressure, identical posture, Identical pupil dilation. No living group does anything identically. The system classified it as coercion. Conditions met. Coerced surrender confirmed. Disarmament. Clause active. Territorial concession confirmed. Authorization required. Standing order 7-7. Halta leaned forward. He entered 6 characters. His fingers did not hesitate. There was nothing to hesitate about. This was not a decision. The decision had been made before he was assigned to this room, before the Eldari arrived, before anyone knew what the Eldari were. The screen changed. Standing order confirmed. Activation immediate. No further input required. Halta stood. He looked at the console for 3 seconds, not with emotion, not with doubt, with the expression of a man checking that a door is locked before leaving the house. He walked out. The blast door sealed behind him. Magnetic locks engaged. The room would remain sealed until someone cut through 600 meters of ice to reach it. It would not matter by then. Beneath the ice, through hardened relays that ran along the moons of Jupiter, through dead satellites repurposed as signal repeaters, through ghost channels buried in commercial shipping frequencies, the activation command moved outward. It did not travel like a message. It traveled like a pulse, touching each node for a fraction of a second, just long enough to deliver a single encrypted confirmation, then moving on. It reached a constellation of objects in high orbit above Ardennis, objects catalogued as debris by Eldari surveyors who had scanned the orbital lanes after the conquest and found nothing worth noting. Twisted metal, spent fuel casings, the wreckage of a war fought and won, mass profiles that did not match their catalogued origins, irregular, noted, dismissed, no psychic signature, no intent, nothing that registered as a threat. It reached a network of containers on the surface of 3 occupied worlds, logged as agricultural equipment, stored, ignored. They did not have psychic signatures. They did not have thoughts. They did not have minds. They had targeting packages. It reached buried caches on dead moons, relay stations on abandoned platforms, dormant satellites in decaying orbits that, for the first time in years, corrected themselves. Communication nodes existing in the gaps between frequencies the Eldari monitored. Everything received the same instruction. They all acknowledged. They began to move. On the Valith ascending, the gala continued. Seluvan projected a final image to the assembly. Earth at peace, humanity contained, the galaxy in order. He held the image for a long, satisfied moment. 300 minds received it and accepted it as truth. Then something shifted, not in the room, not in the projection, in the space behind the projection, the psychic background noise that Vithani processed subconsciously the way humans process ambient sound. A frequency changed. A pattern that had been static for months moved. Seluvan paused, his silver eyes narrowed by a fraction. He reached outward with his mind, scanning the local psychic field. Nothing. No hostile thought. No aggression. No fear. The humans in the room were blank, suppressed, compliant. The alien delegates were calm. His compliance officers reported nothing unusual. But something had moved. He scanned further, past the hull of the flagship, past the escort fleet, into the orbital space surrounding the vessel. Nothing. No minds. No intent. No hostility. Seluvan dismissed it. Background noise, stellar interference, the residual psychic echo of 300 minds in a confined space. He composed himself. He resumed his projection. Across the hall, Dukovich had not moved. His hands were still clasped. His face was still stone. His compliance officer monitored him passively and detected nothing. But in the silence of his own skull, beneath the suppression field, beneath the weight of occupation and defeat and a gray suit that fit poorly on purpose, Marin Dukovich allowed himself one thought. The floor was opening. The Gala was 14 minutes old when the first warship died. Saluvan did not feel it happen. That was the detail that would haunt him later. Not the destruction itself, but the silence that preceded it. He was standing in the center of the observation hall, projecting a vision of galactic order to the Torvesi delegation, when the floor shifted beneath his feet. A subtle thing, the kind of movement a flagship should never make. He paused. The Torvesi clicked their arms in confusion. Around the hall, conversations continued. Bioluminescent displays pulsed. Drinks were consumed. The Krython ambassador was examining a piece of living art that responded to psychic proximity. The floor shifted again. Saluvan reached outward. He pushed his awareness past the hull, past the diplomatic escort ring, into the orbital space surrounding the Velith ascending. He felt for minds, for intent, for the bright, hot signature of aggression that always preceded an attack. Nothing. The void was empty of thought, cold, mechanical. The escort fleet drifted in formation, 12 warships arranged in a ceremonial pattern that doubled as a defensive screen. Their crews were calm. Their captains were calm. Everything was calm. Then the Dranathi, a heavy cruiser on the outer ring, ceased to exist. There was no explosion in the traditional sense. Kinetic impactors do not explode. They arrive. The objects had already been there, catalogued as debris, drifting inside the escort perimeter. Too close. Too familiar. Part of the background the sensors had learned to ignore. When they moved, the system registered the change. Reclassification triggered. Threat assessment engaged. It did not matter. The distance was too short. The time was already gone. 3 tungsten rods, each the length of a rail car, each moving at 4% of light speed, struck the Dranathi along its dorsal spine within a window of 6 milliseconds. The first rod pierced the shield array. The shield array was designed to absorb energy weapons and deflect psychic interference. It was not designed to respond to mass already inside its effective perimeter. The rod passed through the shield like a needle through smoke. The second rod hit the reactor housing. The third rod hit the command deck. The Dranathi folded inward. The cruiser broke into 3 pieces that tumbled away from each other in slow, almost graceful arcs, trailing atmosphere and bodies and fire. 4 seconds later, the Velith and the Oseran, flanking cruisers on the inner ring, took identical hits. The Velith lost its entire forward section. The Oseran split lengthwise, reactors breaching simultaneously, producing a flash so bright it burned temporary shadows into the Velith Ascending's external sensors. 3 warships, 9 rods, 11 seconds. The Gala Hall shuddered violently. The bioluminescent displays flickered and went dark. Several alien delegates stumbled. The ON observers dropped from their ceiling positions, grav harnesses destabilized by the flagship's sudden evasive maneuvering. The Krython ambassador retracted into his environmental suit so fast the seals cracked. Saluvan stood motionless in the center of the hall. His silver eyes were wide, not with fear, with incomprehension. He was the most powerful psychic in the sector. He had felt nothing, no intent, no anger, no decision to fire, no mind behind the attack. He reached out again, harder this time, pushing his awareness to its maximum range. He swept the orbital space. He swept the debris fields. He swept the wreckage of the 3 dead warships, searching for survivors whose thoughts might tell him what had happened. He found the survivors. Their thoughts were screaming, terror, confusion, pain. Not one of them had seen the attack coming. Not one of them understood what had hit them. And beyond the screaming, in the space where the rods had originated, nothing. The flagship lurched. Emergency projections flooded the hall. the Vithani equivalent of alarm klaxons. Images of damage cascaded through every mind on board. Hull breaches, escort formation broken, 3 capital ships destroyed, point of origin unknown. Seluvan felt the other Vithani reaching out in coordinated panic, trying to form a detection web, a psychic net designed to catch the signature of any thinking attacker within range. It was standard doctrine. It had never failed. Identify the mind, then respond. The web found nothing. A 4th volley hit. This time the flagship, not the gala hall. The structure beneath it. The massive load-bearing struts that connected the diplomatic section to the drive core. The rods struck there, off-center, and at opposing angles, designed to twist the ship's frame rather than tear it apart outright. The impact did not destroy the vessel. It bent it, stressed it, forced sections of the hull out of alignment, and pushed the entire structure toward failure. Not because Cobalt was being merciful, because the targeting package designated the Valith Ascending as a high-value communications node. Cripple it. Do not destroy it. Let it drift. Let it broadcast damage reports and distress signals. Let those signals pull Eldari response forces into predictable positions. The hull split down its center axis. A seam opened in the floor, 3 centimeters wide, running from the observation windows to the rear gallery. Atmosphere began whistling through the gap. Emergency barriers deployed, translucent membranes that sealed breaches automatically, but the structural damage was done. The flagship was bending. The alien delegates broke. The Torvesi scrambled for the evacuation corridors, their chitinous legs clattering on the fractured floor. The ON activated emergency propulsion and blasted through an observation window, preferring vacuum to a collapsing superstructure. The Devasik did not move. They sat in their chairs with their stone faces and waited, because 4 centuries of subjugation had taught them that running never helped. The moment the first impact hit, Dukovich was on the floor. A controlled descent, knees first, hands flat, center of gravity low. Combat reflex. The compliance officer assigned to him was gone, thrown sideways when the hull seam opened, his suppression field flickering out like a candle in wind. He crawled toward the evacuation corridor, moving under the smoke and debris, while every alien in the room ran above him. No one looked down. No one ever looked at the furniture. Seluvan grabbed the nearest Vithani officer by the arm. Physical contact. The most urgent form of communication his species possessed, reserved for moments when projection was too slow. He pushed an image directly into the officer's mind. The escort fleet, the attack vectors, the empty space where the attacker should be. The officer pushed back a single image, sensors showing the orbital debris field surrounding the flagship. Debris that was moving, reconfiguring. The debris was the weapon. Seluvan processed this in 2 seconds. In the next, he understood what it meant. The debris had not arrived with the attack. It had been there, waiting, long before the treaty. He moved toward the command evacuation corridor. The gala was over. On Ardennis, Sergeant Major Oral Brask was sitting on an overturned crate in a storage yard when the Eldari patrol stopped. He noticed it the way a man notices patterns when they are all he has left to watch. The patrol, at 36 minutes, stopped mid-route and went still. Their eyes, the same solid silver as all Eldari, went unfocused. Their heads tilted slightly upward and to the left, as if listening to something only they could hear. The next patrol, due at 40, never appeared. Brask had been a soldier for 22 years. He had fought the Eldari during the 7-Day War. He had watched his fire team leader forget how to breathe during a psychic suppression wave, and he had kept firing anyway because his hands remembered what his brain temporarily could not. He had surrendered with the rest. He had been demobilized, disarmed, relocated to Ardennis, and given a job in a storage yard as part of the treaty's population redistribution clause. He had also cached 3 firearms, 2 breaching charges, and a field medic kit inside a drainage pipe beneath the yard within days of arriving, not because anyone told him to, because he was the kind of man who buried guns the way some people kept emergency food supplies. Reflex. Habit. The bone-deep suspicion that peace imposed by someone else was not peace. Brask did not know what Cobalt was. He did not know about killsats or drone swarms or buried relay stations on Callisto. He knew nothing about standing orders or dead-hand systems or the man who had built them. But he knew what a distracted enemy looked like. He stood up slowly. He walked to the drainage pipe. He reached inside and pulled out a weapon that had been wrapped in thermal sheeting and sealed in vacuum film. The Eldari soldiers did not notice. They were still looking up. Something was happening in orbit. Brask could not see it, but he could feel it. A change in air pressure, a subsonic vibration transmitted through the colony's atmospheric processors, a frequency that meant something very large was happening very far above him. He checked the weapon. Charged. Clean. Functional. He waited. Across 3 occupied worlds, Cobalt's second phase activated. The containers opened, not all at once, in sequence. Timed to local conditions, staggered to maximize confusion and prevent coordinated Eldari response. On Ardennis, 47 containers in 12 locations split their seals simultaneously. On Verath, 31 containers did the same. On Callus Minor, 19. From each container, drones emerged. They were not elegant, not sleek, not the sculpted psionic integrated machines the Eldari built. They were blocky, industrial, human. Each one roughly the size of a large dog, armored in ablative plating, powered by hydrogen cells that gave them 8 hours of operational capacity, armed with a rotary kinetic weapon that could fire 1,200 rounds per minute. They had no AI in the way the Eldari understood intelligence. They had targeting algorithms, pathfinding routines, and a priority list burned into non-volatile memory. Priority 1, Eldari communication relays. Priority 2, shield generators. Priority 3, command posts. Priority 4, armed personnel. They launched in swarms, hundreds on each world, rising from storage yards, cargo depots, abandoned lots, and decommissioned landing pads. They flew low and fast, navigating between buildings, under bridges, through infrastructure corridors designed for maintenance vehicles. They were loud. Their rotary weapons spooled up with a mechanical whine that echoed off colony walls and carried for blocks. On Ardennis, the Eldari garrison commander, a Vithani named Seleth, organized a projection wave within 90 seconds of the first drone sighting. 40 Eldari soldiers linked their psychic fields and pushed outward, generating a suppression pulse designed to overwhelm the cognitive functions of any thinking attacker within a 2-kilometer radius. The drones hit the communication relay on Ardennis's eastern plateau 7 minutes after emerging. 1,200 rounds per minute, concentrated on the relay's primary transmitter array. The array, designed to withstand energy weapon interference and psychic disruption, was not designed to withstand physical projectiles fired at close range by machines that did not care about dying. The relay went dark. Seleth felt it go. One moment the relay was there, a node in the psychic communication web that connected every Eldari unit on Ardennis. The next moment, it was gone, like a voice stopping mid-sentence, like a limb going numb. He reached for the secondary relay. It was already under attack. He reached for the orbital relay. Silence. The killsats had already taken it. He reached for the Valith ascending. He found Seluvan. Seluvan was aboard an evacuation craft, 40 kilometers from the crippled flagship, surrounded by the surviving Vithani officers and a handful of alien diplomats who had made it to the escape pods. The craft was running without navigation, The navigation system relied on a psychic-integrated targeting array that was currently cycling through error states because it could not identify an attacker that did not think. Seleth projected the situation on Ardennis. Drones, communication loss, ground chaos. Seluvan projected back, the same situation in orbit. Killsats, escort fleet destroyed, flagship crippled. For a moment, the two most powerful minds on their respective fronts shared the same image, a map of their forces, their infrastructure, their communication networks, and watched it degrade in real time. Nodes going dark, links severing, the web collapsing from the outside in, eaten by things that had no minds, and therefore could not be stopped by the only weapon the Eldari had ever truly relied on. Seluvan pushed a question towards Seleth, not in words, in an image. Humans. Where are the humans? If this is an attack, where are the attackers? Seleth pushed back what his ground forces were reporting. The drones had no human operators, no control signals, no command links. They were fully autonomous, launched from cached positions, operating on preloaded instructions. But that was not the part that made Seleth's projection flicker with something close to dread. The part that did it was this. Humans on Ardennis were moving. Not all of them, but enough. Scattered across the colony, individuals were breaking routine, leaving their assigned zones, moving toward positions that made no tactical sense unless you already knew what was about to happen. They were not communicating. Monitoring showed no signals, no transmissions, no networked activity. They were simply moving, independently, as if they had each, separately, recognized the same signal. The drones were the weapon. The humans were something else. Seluvan received this image and held it. He turned it over in his mind the way a man turns over a stone and finds something crawling underneath. The communication relays were prioritized for destruction. The attack was sequenced, layered, and systemic. And it had begun the moment the treaty was signed. Not hours after, at the exact moment. Seluvan felt the shape of it then, not the full architecture. He did not yet know about Cobalt, about Callisto, about the man who had built it all 17 years before the Eldari arrived. But he felt the outline, the shadow of a structure so large and so patient that it had waited, dormant, silent, invisible, for a single condition to be met. And the Eldari had met it. They had forced humanity to surrender. They had used psychic control to coerce 7 leaders into signing a treaty that stripped their species of sovereignty. They had done it publicly, proudly, ceremonially. But something had been listening. Something that only cared about one question. Was the surrender forced? The answer was yes. And now the sky was falling. Seluvan sat in the evacuation craft and felt, for the first time in his long and distinguished life, the sensation of having made a mistake he could not project his way out of. The Eldari command post on Ardennis had been a school. Before the occupation, it was a technical academy. 3 stories of reinforced colonial architecture built to withstand the seismic tremors that rolled through Ardennis every few months. The Eldari had chosen it for the same reason the colonists had built it strong. It did not break easily. They had gutted the interior and stationed 40 soldiers inside. The school's name was still carved above the main entrance in block letters that the Eldari had not bothered to remove because they could not read them and did not care. Brask hit the east entrance with 6 men. No plan, no briefing, no comms. 6 Grey Line veterans who had found each other in the chaos the way water finds cracks, flowing toward the lowest point, guided by nothing except gravity and the shape of the ground. They had 3 cached human firearms between them, 2 kinetic rifles and Brask's sidearm. The rest carried scavenged Eldari weapons, slender, crystalline things designed for hands that curved differently than human hands. They were awkward to hold. The firing mechanism responded to psychic intent, which humans could not provide, so they had been hot-wired with makeshift trigger bypasses, copper wire, battery contacts, tape, crude, functional. The weapons fired bolts of focused energy that burned through walls and left the air smelling like ozone and scorched calcium. Brask went through the door first. The corridor was dark. The Eldari had designed their interior lighting to respond to psychic presence, lights activated when a mind approached. The system read Brask's mind and produced a dim, confused flicker, like a lamp trying to turn on for someone it did not recognize. 2 Eldari soldiers were in the corridor. They had been attempting to establish a local psychic link, standing face to face, eyes closed, hands raised, trying to reach through the collapsed network to any surviving node. They were concentrating so hard they did not hear the door. Brask shot the first one with the sidearm. Center mass. The Eldari's body folded differently than a human body would, the curved bones flexing inward rather than backward, the silver eyes going flat like coins. The second one opened his eyes and projected. The projection hit Brask like a wall of cold water. His vision blurred. His right hand went numb. The image forced into his mind was simple and overwhelming. Stop. Not a command. A sensation. The psychic equivalent of a hand pressing against his chest. His legs slowed. His finger loosened on the trigger. Behind him, a Grey Line veteran named Torin, a man Brask had met 40 minutes ago, fired a scavenged Eldari weapon over Brask's shoulder. The energy bolt took the projecting soldier in the throat. The projection cut out instantly, like a radio losing power. Brask's vision cleared. His hand came back. He did not pause to recover. He stepped over the body and moved deeper into the building. Second floor. 4 Eldari in a room that had been the relay control center. Projection platforms lined the walls. Circular devices that amplified psychic signals the way antenna dishes amplify radio waves. 3 of the platforms were dark, destroyed by drone strikes on external relays. The 4th was still active, and the 4 Eldari were clustered around it, trying to push a signal through to orbit. Brask's team hit the room from 2 entries simultaneously. Not because they coordinated, because 2 of the veterans had found a stairwell and arrived at the second door at the same moment Brask reached the first. Instinct and architecture. The fight lasted 11 seconds. Eldari soldiers were not weak. They were tall, fast, and their bones, though curved, were denser than human bone. In close quarters, a trained Eldari could project a focused psychic pulse that caused temporary paralysis, disorientation, or in extreme cases, cardiac disruption. They were dangerous, but they were not built for this. They were built for wars fought at psychic range, where the enemy could be disabled before physical contact occurred. They were built for conflicts where the attacker had a mind to read, intentions to predict, fears to exploit. Brask did not fight with his mind. He fought with his skeleton. An Eldari soldier projected a paralysis pulse at the veteran coming through the second door. The veteran's left side locked up. He fell against the doorframe. His right hand, still functional, brought the scavenged weapon up and fired from the hip. The bolt missed the projecting soldier and hit the active relay platform. The platform exploded in a shower of crystalline fragments that shredded the 2 nearest Eldari like shrapnel. Brask shot the 3rd. Torin shot the 4th. The relay was destroyed. The last connection between the Ardennis garrison and orbit was gone. Brask leaned against the wall. His left arm was bleeding. A fragment from the relay explosion had opened a gash from elbow to wrist. He looked at it, looked at Torin, looked at the room full of dead Eldari and shattered technology. He pulled a strip of thermal sheeting from his jacket, wrapped the arm, tied it with his teeth, and moved toward the 3rd floor. Aboard the evacuation craft, Seluvan was losing the war in real time. The craft had drifted to a position 47 kilometers from the Vylith Ascending's wreckage. The flagship was not destroyed. The killsats had crippled it precisely as designed, but it was dark, venting atmosphere from multiple decks. Its psychic amplification architecture shattered. It hung in orbit like a cathedral with its windows broken, still massive, still beautiful in its lines, but empty of the thing that had made it powerful. Seluvan stood in the center of the evacuation craft's small command bay. 7 surviving Vithani officers surrounded him. They were maintaining a direct psychic link, mind to mind, without relay infrastructure, burning through their own cognitive reserves to sustain communication across distances. Their biology was never meant to bridge without amplification. Reports arrived in fragments, images, sensations, emotional impressions carrying tactical data. Ardennes. Ground forces fragmented, communication relays destroyed. Drone swarms operating unopposed in 3 sectors. Human movement increasing. The garrison commander, Seleth, was alive but isolated, unable to reach more than a dozen soldiers through direct psychic contact. His last coherent projection was an image of the colony's central district from above, with Eldari positions marked in fading light. Half were already dark. Verath. Worse. The drone swarms had targeted the planetary shield generator first. Without the shield, the killsats in Verath's orbit had begun ground strikes, kinetic rods hitting military installations with the same mindless precision that had gutted the escort fleet. The Eldari commander on Verath projected a single image before his link degraded. A crater where his command center had been, still glowing. Callus Minor. Nothing. Complete silence. No psychic contact. No signals. No projections. The entire world had gone dark, and Seluvan did not know if that meant the Eldari forces there were dead, suppressed, or simply beyond reach. Seluvan processed each report with the disciplined calm of a leader trained to absorb catastrophe without breaking. But discipline is a surface. Beneath it, something was shifting. Not panic. The Vithani did not panic the way other species did. Something colder. The slow, grinding recognition that the model he had built his entire career on was wrong. He had conquered humanity in 7 days. He had believed, with the same certainty that he believed in gravity or light, that psychic dominance was absolute. That a species without psychic capability was a species without recourse. That disarmament and mental control were sufficient to render any population inert. He had not considered the possibility that a species might build its revenge before the war even started. He issued an order. Concentrate remaining forces. Pull all orbital assets to a defensive position above Ardennes, the largest colony, the most strategic value. Abandon Verath and Callus Minor. Consolidate. Regroup. Counterattack. The order went out through the chain of direct psychic links, mind to mind, degrading with each relay. It reached 4 commanders. 2 confirmed receipt. 1 sent back a confused burst of images that suggested he was under direct attack and could not comply. The 4th did not respond. Seluvan stood in the command bay and felt his civilization's grip on human space loosening, finger by finger, with mechanical inevitability. In the evacuation corridor of the Vylith Ascending, Marin Dukovich reached an escape pod bay that the Eldari had overlooked. Not overlooked, ignored. The bay was in the human section of the flagship, the area designated for monitored civilians. The escape pods were human-manufactured, installed during the flagship's refit for the signing ceremony as a diplomatic concession. Small, basic, designed to sustain 4 people for 72 hours. The Eldari had not prioritized evacuating the human section because the human section was not a priority. Furniture does not need lifeboats. Dukovich sealed himself inside a pod. He did not launch. Not yet. Through the pod's narrow viewport, he could see the debris field that had been the escort fleet. Beyond it, the faint lights of the Killsat constellation, visible now only because they were maneuvering, adjusting orbits, repositioning for the next phase. He watched them move. 17 years. He had spent 17 years building a system he hoped would never activate. He had recruited Halta, knowing the man would spend months alone in a frozen room waiting for a signal that might never come. He had placed assets on worlds that humanity had not yet colonized, gambling that expansion would reach them before conflict did. He had written targeting packages for enemies he could not identify, using threat profiles so general they amounted to a single principle: if it controls us, break it. And now it was working. Not perfectly. Cobalt was not designed for perfection. It was designed for damage, for disruption, for creating chaos so deep and so widespread that no occupying force could maintain control. It was a machine built to break machines, and it was doing exactly what it was built to do. He had created Cobalt because he loved his species enough to plan for its worst day. He had built it knowing that its activation would mean that worst day had arrived. The machine was working. The worst day was here, and the killing was only beginning. He sat in the escape pod and watched the sky fall and felt the weight of being the man who had made the floor open. Then he launched the pod, not toward safety, toward Ardennis, toward the ground, toward whatever came next. On the surface of Ardennis, the ground war had spread beyond the command post. Brask's team, now 11, swelled by Grey Line veterans who appeared from side streets and storage facilities and basement shelters like groundwater rising through cracks, moved through the colony's central district. The Eldari garrison was disintegrating. Without communication relays, without orbital support, without the psychic network that had been the foundation of every tactical decision they had made since arriving, individual units were falling back on instinct. Eldari instinct was to project, to dominate the mental space, to force compliance through sheer psychic pressure against organized armed humans who had been waiting for this moment without knowing they were waiting for it. Psychic pressure was not enough. A Vithani officer on the colony's western perimeter made a stand. He gathered 9 soldiers, formed a projection circle, and pushed outward with everything he had. The psychic wave rolled through 3 city blocks. Humans caught in its radius stumbled. Some dropped. One veteran fell to his knees and could not remember his name for 30 seconds. But the ones behind him kept coming. And the drones, 2 swarm units operating in the same sector, flew through the projection wave without slowing and hit the circle from above. The rotary weapons cut down 4 soldiers before the officer broke the formation and ran. He ran into Brask. Brask did not shoot him immediately. For a fraction of a second, they stood facing each other. The Eldari officer, tall and silver-eyed and radiating psychic terror, and the human sergeant major with a bleeding arm and a weapon he had dug out of a drainage pipe. The officer projected. One final desperate image, pushed directly into Brask's mind with enough force to make his nose bleed. The image was a question. Why? Not a tactical question. Not a military question. A genuine, bewildered existential question from a being whose entire civilization was built on the certainty that psychic dominance was the final authority in the galaxy. Why are you still fighting? We ended this. We won. You signed. Brask did not have psychic ability. He could not project a response. He could not send back an image or an emotion or a concept. He answered with his weapon. The officer dropped. Brask stepped over him and kept moving. By the time the last Eldari communication node on Ardennis went dark, human forces, if they could be called forces, being nothing more than scattered veterans acting on instinct and cached weapons, controlled 6 of the colony's 9 districts. The Eldari garrison had pulled back to the administrative center, a fortified compound surrounded by walls that had been built to project authority, not withstand siege. The drones circled above. The veterans closed in below. The walls held for 2 hours. Then they did not. Aboard the evacuation craft, Seluvan received Seleth's final projection from Ardennis. It was an image, simple, unadorned, stripped of the elegant layering that Vithani communication usually carried. The image was the treaty, the physical document, the signatures, the biometric bonds. And beneath it, like a shadow, the shape of everything that had followed. The killsats, the drones, the ground war, the collapse. Seleth was showing Seluvan the connection, the cause and the effect, the document and the consequence. Seleth's projection carried a single emotional tone beneath the image, recognition. Then Seleth's signal went dark. Whether he was dead or simply beyond reach, Seluvan could not tell. Seluvan stood alone in the command bay. The other Vithani officers had exhausted themselves maintaining long-range links and sat slumped against the walls, their silver eyes dim, their minds burnt to the edges. The evacuation craft drifted in orbit above a battlefield that had been, hours earlier, the site of his greatest triumph. He replayed the image Seleth had sent, the treaty, the signatures, the shadow, and he understood, not partially, not intellectually, fully. The way a mathematician understands a proof, at the moment the last variable resolves, and the equation becomes inevitable. Humanity had not reacted to the treaty. Humanity had not improvised a resistance. Humanity had not scrambled to build weapons in secret after the surrender. The weapons were already built. The plan was already written. The system was already in place. It had been in place before the Eldari arrived, before the 7-day war, before first contact. Humanity had looked at the galaxy and seen this moment coming, not the specifics, the shape, the inevitability, the certainty that somewhere, sometime, something would come that could not be beaten, and that something would demand surrender, and that surrender would be given, because there was no alternative. And they had built a machine that turned surrender into a trigger. The Eldari had not ended the war. They had activated a system that was designed to begin one. Seluvan felt the full weight of it settle into his mind, like ice filling a vessel. Every assumption he had ever held about humanity, their primitiveness, their lack of psychic ability, their emotional volatility, their susceptibility to control, reframed itself in an instant. They were not primitive. They were prepared. They were not lacking. They were different. They were not susceptible to control. They had planned for it. He had stood in the gala hall and projected images of a pacified Earth, a corrected species, a problem solved. He had looked at the human delegates and projected nothing, because they were beneath acknowledgement. He had celebrated the fastest conquest in Eldari history with the absolute confidence of a civilization that had never met a species it could not dominate. And the entire time, beneath the silence, beneath the compliance, beneath the empty faces and the gray civilian clothes and the monitored civilians standing at the back of the room, the floor had been waiting to open. In orbit above Ardennis, as Dukovich's escape pod burned through the upper atmosphere toward the surface, as Brask's veterans secured the last district, as drone swarms completed their final attack runs on infrastructure that would take the Eldari years to rebuild, as the Vithani officers sat exhausted